The Quatermass Experiment.
7 out of 10.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah,
I mean, we don't normally
that's a
rate
good.
movies on here, but I think this is a solid science fiction film. It's not quite a masterpiece. I think of it like with because I love 50s sci-fi. I love like quality 50s sci-fi. I love some bad 50s sci-fi too, but there's like tiers, right? You've got your
Yeah.
top tier of just like The Day the Earth Stood Still, Forbidden Planet. I love the original Invasion of the Body Snatchers. That's probably my second favorite behind The Day the Earth Stood Still. And War of the Worlds would be in there. And I think Quatermass is in that like second tier with like The Fly and The Blob I would put in there.
Hmm.
Creature from the Black Lagoon. Like these are really good movies. They're not quite masterpieces, but I like that this is. I mean, it's a sci-fi monster movie, but it's more than just like a monster, like alarmist movie. There's something going on with Quatermass as a character, and there's some interesting sci-fi ideas too, and that's what I really appreciate out of it. It's
Absolutely.
also well shot. It's well acted. There's some impressive shots with like I love all the cinematography in like the last scene with Quatermass
Yeah.
and everything outside of Westminster. I don't know. It's just really interesting. So what did you think of the Quatermass Experiment?
I personally really love it. The thing that gets me about a lot of 50s sci-fi is just the pace at which they're able to move a lot of movies, and this is one of the briskest and like most
Yeah.
like relentlessly paced ones there
Yeah,
is.
that's true. A lot of those movies have pacing issues because you just have these long scenes of exposition or something
Yeah,
like that.
exactly. Especially
Even
in
Godzilla
America.
has that. I love Godzilla, but that's got like the briefing scene and everything. Yeah.
Yeah, and this one is just like all killer no filler practically. You sort of get to it like as like there are exposition scenes, but they all do feel necessary to answer questions
Right.
until you get to the chasing part in the second act.
Mm-hmm.
And then you're just on the edge of your seat practically because there's so much you don't know. You still never know what's happening with him with Karun until like the very last act of the movie, and so you're wondering what's going to happen to everyone he encounters. And yeah, for me, the not the old I'm not old, but like the older I get, the more I am just interested in movies that are able to keep things at a really brisk, exciting pace. Beyond this does like I think the thing that's interesting is that this does you mentioned this has a lot of really interesting sci-fi ideas. It absolutely does, but it doesn't have as much social commentary and political commentary that a lot of people
No,
talk
that's
about when they
probably
bring
true.
up 50s sci-fi. But I don't think it needs it. I think it's just
And
a
like
good
any
story.
space race thing is going to be talked about with the Cold War, obviously, but I agree that's muted here.
Yeah.
There's not a whole lot there.
Well, it's England as opposed to U.S. or
That could be the biggest
Soviet
reason
Union.
too. Yeah, it's not that Britain wasn't involved in the Cold War. You know, Winston Churchill coined the term "Iron Curtain." After all, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. But that wasn't as big of a giant problem here in England as it was in America. It wasn't like the looming fear of nuclear winter.
Which we'll see in Bride of the Monster, kind of.
Yeah, no, it's actually very interesting to look at the two of them in the same night like I did. But yeah, I genuinely just really appreciate it on a like a filmic level, just how much it's able to move, how it never really gets uninteresting, the
Right.
sci-fi ideas that are there, the fact that the monster is pretty unique and interesting for its time, especially. And
Yeah, this
that
is
it's just
before the
gruesome.
Blob.
Yeah, exactly. Like
There were similarities with the Blob, obviously.
this
but
is
yeah, it's before the Blob. It's before Ditto.
yeah.
Before Kirby.
Well, I mean, the crazy thing is, this is a blob-like creature that just absorbs everything it comes into contact with. But at the same time, it's fleshy and gross.
Yeah, it's not and it's also not a blob from the beginning. We see it
Yeah.
as a human and how it affects a human, and then eventually the reveal of it being this like blob thing. And you're right, it's not just a pure blob like the Jello or whatever, Ghostbusters 2 type thing. Like there's more to it than that. There's textures, and it's just
Yeah.
interesting to look at
The
visually.
weird looking fleshy, like with these long phallic octopus arms. Ben, you commented earlier on the name of the movie.
Yeah.
And I think the creeping unknown is a good name for it if it wasn't
is.
about the mad scientist, because that really is kind of the way to describe the creature at the center
It's a
of it
good
all.
title. It's a bit too for me. It's a bit too reminiscent of The Creeping Terror,
Or the Crawling
which is possibly
Eye.
the worst monster movie ever.
Yeah, absolutely.
but we can't blame this movie for that.
Yeah, you had the Creeping Terror, the Crawling Eye, the Crawling Hand. I mean, it's similar to a lot of titles, but really, if you're going to describe this thing in
The
any
Screaming
way,
Skull.
if you're going to describe this movie in any way, I think a creeping unknown is one of the best things. And I just looked up
Unidentified Creeping Object, perhaps, would be a decent title.
Yuko.
UCO.
Yeah. I will say the other thing that I really appreciate about the monster, because I just looked up some more pictures of it, it's got like these weird little hair things at the top of it that's just really gross, you know? It's good stuff. Like the only other movie I can think of that's like gorier than this or more gruesome, it doesn't come until
Fiend Without a Face.
I haven't actually seen Fiend Without a Face, so it could be. That would be before.
It's a few years after this, but that's probably it's also a British sci-fi movie.
What I actually was going to bring up was The Brain That Wouldn't Die.
Oh, yeah. That's a little bit later, too. Yeah, that's a surprisingly gruesome movie for its day.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bad movie, but like they rip a guy's arm off.
That's the first Mystery Science Theater 3000 episode I think I ever saw. I think so. It's either that or Soul Taker.
That's not a bad one to start with, because it's like it has to kind of, because Mike is taking over as host, it has to kind of reintroduce the story.
Yeah, that's literally Mike's first episode, right?
Yeah, it has to like kind of reintroduce the story of the show and like ease you into it, but also
story being used a little loosely here, but yeah.
But the writing is at like such a high level already. Like when that happens, that
I love the honey roasted joke. Always stood out to me.
Yeah,
and when he's running around with the fake head and it's like wrapped up and he's got it like under his arm and he's like, he's at the 40, he's at 30, no one will catch him. It's some great stuff. I love that movie.
There aren't really many other movies from that period I can think of that are as gruesome, so it really does earn that experiment title, you know?
Yeah.